John, how are you? No stress. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, gotcha.
There we go.
How you doing?
Well, thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good, thank you. Hope you had a good weekend and all that.
I did. I went down to the south coast with the family, which was equal parts relaxing and stressful.
Sounds like a well-balanced weekend then, rather than no relaxing or no stress. So
yeah.
Look, John, thank you very much for finding the time to have this conversation. I'll pick you up. I'll refresh you on how this all came about, because I know it's been a little while. Oh, have I lost you? No? Yeah, sorry, all good. So back, it would have been a month or two ago. So it is saying my internet connection's unstable. So if I drop out at all, apologies. But a month or two ago, we presented BitLeave as a leave management, excess leave liability management, and reward platform with this kind of underlying concept of the ability to convert leave into currency. And you kind of shared some concerns with me, which were really valuable. And I think at the time you were saying, look, I'm not going to get involved for these reasons. And that's totally fine. I just think it's really a good perspective for us to actually learn about. And I don't think it's going to be too dissimilar to some other opinions and perspectives as well. So I guess we're keen to explore that concern that you shared, but also keen to learn more about what you and William Buck are doing already that maybe means you're solving the problems that we're talking about in a different way, or you've still got the problems, you just don't believe in this as a solution. All of that kind of stuff, really interesting for us to explore. So before we get into just jumping in and prodding you with questions and things, I might give Brett an opportunity to introduce himself properly, and then if I can ask you to introduce yourself, John, as well after that, so you guys know each other, and then we can just kind of see where the conversation goes. But I do have a tight finish at the end of this, and I'm sure you've got other things to do too, John, so I'll make sure we wrap up right on time, if not sooner, depending on how we go. Cool. Easy.
Thanks,
do you want to...
Yeah, no problems. Hey, John, where did you go on the south coast?
Kiama.
Yeah, cool. I live in Woonona, so
Cool.
far at all. It's a good part of the world.
My friend's got his family's got a holiday house there. They've had for like the last 30 years. Yeah, we end up going down there about 4 times a year ourselves. So
yeah, got to make the most of it, mate. Fantastic. Good weather too, mate. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it, and I also really appreciate the constructive feedback and the differing opinion. I'm looking forward to digging into that with you. My background is ex-military special operations turned tech product management. And I've done a lot of HR and recruitment stuff, hence why the HR spin on where we're going. So that's a really simple and condensed version of my background. Started the business, started this year through the Antler Accelerator. Got funded off the back of that, and myself and my co-founder are in the middle of obviously in a closed beta and launching into next year. So that's really, in a short synopsis, our background.
Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I'm I'm a ex-accountant, then ex-software, kind of back into accounting industry now. So I started off as an accountant, kind of went through, I guess, the traditional accounting path of cadetship and all of that, and found myself doing a lot of tech type and process type stuff, and moved into Reckon APS, which is a software company that caters mainly to accountants, or specifically to accountants, and did kind of a lot of project managing and consulting for them. And then for the last 3 years, I've been at William Buck, New South Wales, who are actually one of my clients. And then I moved over into in-house, taking care of kind of internal change and transformation projects. And it's kind of the project or the program is infinite enough that we kind of, it's very much a team of 1 or 2, and we're kind of very kind of agile in that respect, but we're also trying to deal with a very big company and a growing company, which has dealt its own kind of challenges. But yeah, and I've kind of gotten involved in this mainly through another colleague, Stacey, who was from PKF, which is another firm I used to work with as well.
Oh, cool. Thanks, John. Brett, do you want to jump in? Otherwise, I got something to ask to kind of kick it off.
Yeah, you go, Jack. Lead the charge, mate.
Cool. So, I mean, to set the scene a little bit, John, just with respect to like the Early Adopters Hub, why we even have these conversations, give you a little bit more, background, I suppose. When you're building a startup, the first thing that you want to do is validate that the problem exists.
Yeah.
If the problem doesn't exist, no one feels the pain point. It doesn't matter what you're building. The second piece is then, once the problem is validated, is what we're potentially looking at as a solution going to actually solve that problem in your eyes? So where your concerns for me was around the potential solution.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know whether or not you feel the problem, which is around managing excess leave liabilities. And I'm happy for you to speak on behalf of the firm. I'm guessing you're more internal facing rather than. I'm happy for you to...
we had to have a lot of those discussions during COVID, and obviously people weren't taking leave.
So if you can speak on behalf of your clients as well. If you can't, then just internal is fine. So how are you guys managing excess leave, but also managing that, making sure the team is resourced and productivity remains up? And, how are you guys handling all of these, juggling these balls?
The answer, quite simply, is quite ad hoc, and I wouldn't say that we're managing it as so much as dealing with it.
Okay.
During COVID, especially last year, we had situations where we were seeing the leave balances creep up, because beyond the, professional services firms or accounting firms in particular, I guess is the experience I can talk to, is, they're very good, and they've kind of been quite accepting of, well, Christmas shutdown is Christmas shutdown, so that burns 7 to 10 days of leave, one way or the other. So people are accruing really a couple of extra weeks. And so I guess excess balances beyond a couple of, some of the more longer term, typically, employees, it has never seemed to be too much of an issue, because there's you said you get 7 days out of the 20 that are accounted for by shutdown. And then, conditions have been such that, people going on leave, was especially during, called the European summer, was never really too much of an issue. You got the younger crew that would kind of tend to go away during the European summer. The older crew are taking off school holidays. There isn't too much in between that causes that much of an issue. And I see more of an issue, and I've seen in the past with a lot of accounting firms in particular, the issue is more around resourcing when people do go on leave versus really tackling huge balances of it. And that's probably a product of, enforced shutdowns, and that taking up a good chunk of that. So and people wanting to take a break as well. What we did during COVID was really quite simple, and I think we said it was if you had more than, I want to say 6 weeks. I don't think we said 4. I think we said 6. Is that if you had more than 6 weeks, to try and get the balance down to 6 weeks or under. And so we had, and again, that was really affecting a handful of really people that had accrued long service leave, more than anything, and we had them dropping down to 4 days or something like that to try and burn up some leave that way. So I wouldn't say that we were proactively managing it or proactively doing anything special. It was literally a case of asking people to take leave. And we had accrued a bit of capital in that respect, because unlike a lot of other firms and a lot of other businesses during COVID, we didn't ask the staff to take a cut in the first case. You had a lot of firms that said, we're going to cut to 80% or, cut to 4 days or whatever it was. Because the main concern around accounting, and things that accounting firms always have to work, especially in the compliance space, the concern was always around whether people would pay. And so it was a matter of turning staff into, debtor financing, really. We didn't do that, and we made it quite clear that the directors were the ones taking a hit in drawings at the time. So we built up some capital, and so we kind of said, look, what we want is for people to take leave. Yes, as I said, in my experience personally, what I found is that the problem is more resource management from a job perspective when people do go on leave versus having to manage an excess leave balance.
What within that problem is it? I mean, I don't want to lead you down any pathway, but I suppose the things that come to my mind is it a lack of visibility over people about to take leave ahead of time, or is there something else that's causing an issue with resourcing when people want to take leave?
Yeah, it tends to be. I mean, there is a bit of not knowing when, and people are obviously not putting in plans until they're really going to take it. But I think a lot of that, the teams individually know that a little bit intrinsically, because they know that a lot of the parents with school age kids will take leave during holidays or whatever. If they're taking a week here, a week there, it doesn't really matter. And the nature of booking overseas holidays is such that you do know quite a bit in advance, because people book their tickets and then apply for leave, or the other way around. So it's more around the managing the jobs to take account for that. And what I find is a lot of firms, and including us, I'll say, don't do particularly well, is updating their capacity spreadsheets or their capacity planning modules to show those blanks and to then plan the work to see where there's over and under allocation and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of them have the software to do it, but maintaining it is painful, so they don't.
Okay, cool. You have anything you want to dive into there, Brad?
Yeah, I'm just reading the previous notes as well, I think from John's original email as well. Just so I'm getting the right beat on it, which is good. So with so you said in that little part there, you got everyone to get it under six weeks annual leave through COVID. You had people with excess leave balance. So excess leave balances post the National Employment Standards 4 weeks definition are still present at William Buck, from what you've mentioned. But can you give me an insight into like what sort of percentage of the workforce you would estimate to have that sort of excess leave balance?
Oh, I couldn't tell you with certainty, but I know the number of people it affected was maybe it would have been under 5% that were taking big chunks like that.
Yeah. Okay. And you said like the planning and resourcing piece around like their capacity planning. Who's generally missing the boat with that sort of problem? Like, is it a partner-led forecasting issue? Where does that issue lie within the business?
It's definitely a partner-led issue, and it kind of goes back to the first job is always, or the first issue is always, and this is I see it very common especially across the accounting industries, workflow tracking. I mean, we know off the bat that we've got circa 6,000 tax returns to lodge, and we know when they're due, but that's really spread out between 3 or 4 due dates. There's still a lot of space in between. And what I find is that in a large business like ours, each team kind of has their own tracking, whether it's Excel, whether it's whatever. And there's not a lot of they'll do some revenue forecasting around budget time, but they won't do workflow forecasting. Right. So they'll kind of go, okay, what we expect to build this kind of work at this kind of time, and they'll do it so they can fill out their budgets, but they won't then look at, because they're used to grads coming in, and so they say, well, grads come in February, and then they'll replace whoever leaves. It's kind of, there's not a lot of tracking that then happens beyond who's going to do each piece of work, and so then who's got over or under allocations. So, I mean, really, that's probably a manager role versus, say, a partner role, but it needs to start at the top. And the partners have historically, and then again, this is kind of a general thing, not necessarily, although it does affect our firm. I find that it's beyond budgeting, people kind of lose interest.
Okay. And another sort of question from a different sort of area. What's do you know what your churn or attrition rate is currently? And then a subset to that question, do you know what sort of percentage of the people are suffering from burnout when they exit the business?
Couldn't tell you. I know like a lot of people in the accounting industry, it's feeling a bit high at the moment, and definitely trying to get new people in is tough. As to the people that would attribute that exit to burnout versus better opportunities, I couldn't tell you.
What efforts has the firm gone to around that? It's hard to get people. We're aware of that, and so holding on to people is obviously quite critical.
Yeah.
What kind of initiatives are you guys trying to move forward with, or have been rolling out to retain staff or reward and recognize them?
I mean, the key one, obviously, especially for a firm like ours, which was quite traditional, was boosting things like flexible work. Was a big one. And it was a big one for us. Like, it was one of those things where, pre-COVID, we were not very flexible in that respect. Beyond, I guess, the critic, absolutely, we need someone's coming to the house, so I need to be able to access myself, kind of thing. And it's now more ingrained in policy, I would say. Our kind of thing has always been around training, and it's kind of boosting the value proposition for the employees around quality, and kind of saying, we'll boost you professionally, and kind of be, and we're very big on, one of the things I would say that we do very well is technical training at different levels. We've got a very organised and we do things like we have grad college, seniors college, managers college, and that's like for the William Buck network, and it's in person. So we'll get all the grads nationally into one spot and put them through. So it's that cross office networking. So we really try to focus on the professional development side, versus the, perks side. One thing that we have been focusing more on that is as well social responsibility. So doing things like, boosting the pro bono side, and things like workplace giving, and engagement through charities has been a big one as well.
So you mentioned professional development. It seems like there's a large cultural emphasis as well on the piece of getting people together and creating that strong culture. Do you have, like, I know you said that's the main focus. Are there anything sitting on in, like, for the reward structure, like perks, benefits, like monetary, non-monetary sort of things based for productivity or other elements of the business?
So, especially during sort of massive recruitment issues like at the moment, we did things like double our referral bonuses in terms of getting people in.
And what's that, John, amount-wise, if you don't mind me asking?
At the moment, well, I know because I benefited from it. We got about 10 grand. So the standard referral bonus for kind of experience hires is 5 grand.
Okay.
And during the last little while, we doubled it to 10.
And has that moved the needle in the recruitment effort?
Not as much as you'd think.
Okay.
Which is probably more of a, it's probably more of a accountants, and networking is always interesting, and kind of effective networking. But I think the other kind of bonuses or incentives that we do is, so we have a monthly award system called Captain Buck, and what we do there is literally it's just like a reward recognition. So someone could nominate anyone in their team, and they'll usually give a reason around there's something, a particular project or something that's happened that they did really well at. And so there's a monetary reward there. And I can't remember how much it is, but there's a monetary reward there. But that everyone who gets nominated throughout the year is then nominated for Employee of the Year at the end. So if you get nominated for that, you're also in the bucket for Employee of the Year at the Christmas party.
What's the reward if you won something like that?
Again, I'm not quite sure, but it's monetary, and it might be, I can't remember how much it is, but it's decent. But I think it's more, you get the trophy and you get the recognition and all that. And we're big on the awards. We kind of laugh about the Christmas party because it is quite old school, but it's like an old school kind of dinner and awards night. But the thing is that the upshot of that is management, especially the directors and the exec, place a high level of value on that and make a big noise about it.
Okay, and do you periodically measure go out to the employees to sort of see what benefits they're looking for to support them outside of work, or has this been a long-standing piece?
That one's been a long-standing piece. The workplace giving stuff's been relatively recent, and that was being driven. That got driven by a couple of people in specific. The other thing that I didn't mention is the social club. So then we have people kind of have an opt-in for the social club, and we do things like, and again, it's all about culture and people in the office. And so it's like, they'll put on events. So whenever we do like a firm event, there's always like social club will get you into all of that. So drinks, functions, and all that kind of stuff, as well as things like the typical kind of monthly birthday treats and all of that. So social club tends to put on, as part of what you contribute to social club, it'll do things like every month for people's birthdays, like the group birthdays kind of thing, they just load up the kitchen with snacks and cakes and all that kind of stuff. But we haven't done a kind of pulse type surveys that we do tend to, it does cover recognition, kind of do you feel recognized and all of that. There is obviously comments for, how do you, is there anything missing? But it tends to be more remuneration focused.
Okay, and what's some of the common feedback on those surveys that you receive from employees?
I'd have to probably talk to HR about that one because they would administer that more.
Okay, and do they drive traditionally the rewards and recognition program within the business? Are they the sort of main conduit for it?
Yeah.
And do the partners get input on how they like to reward their own individual team and members?
Yeah, and they'll do their own team things, and you'll see a lot of teams will make a point of doing cakes and lunches and all that kind of stuff as well. The other thing that I'll probably mention again, this is more related to the workplace giving thing, but it just speaks to the emphasis that we try to put on, matching engagement versus throwing stuff out. Is that if the firm's supporting a particular, like so I'm using Movember as an example, or we did one last month for mental health, which was like the kilometre challenge, like the walking challenge. I think it was for Black Dog or whatever it was. Where there's an initiative like that and like people contribute, it's more often than not the firm will then say directors will match dollar for dollar what goes through that, so people kind of feel that there's more benefit in that because they'll kind of get matched on whatever they put in.
Yeah. Okay.
But we are big enough that we kind of do leave it a bit to the teams as well to know what will reward their teams. Like for example, most people will do like each team does have like an allocation for kind of staff outings or like team events. So there'll be a budget of, I think the Magic FBT number is $300 a person. And it's kind of like, that budget gets allocated so that it can be used. And, some teams will go out for a lunch, some teams will do an event. I know I was working for one of the teams where one of the directors was part of like a timeshare in like a boat. And so they would contribute they'd use the budget to then buy food and stuff to cater on the boat or something like that. So it's that they do tend, because we're quite large, we do like tend to leave it up to the teams.
Yeah. So that you've mentioned a lot of stuff there. I know it's probably going to be a bit of a stretch for you to be able to answer, but do you know what the average spend for awards and recognition is per year per team?
Couldn't tell you. I'm not sure, but it's like I said, I know that there's the budget on that kind of stuff, on like for that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And then for the other rewards and recognition, I'm not sure.
Yeah, interesting. It'd be fascinating to sort of know those sort of data points. But like you said, it's probably more sitting with HR and the
HR
individual
and finance
teams as well.
when they pay the bills.
Yeah, it's a good place to be. So it also sounds like you've mentioned that there is an excess leave issue. There's a rewards and recognition program, pretty well formed and in place. And it sounds like this is probably more of a direct question. We can sort of drill down into it further, but
Yeah.
there an accepted threshold within the organization of what excess leave is before it even becomes really something on the target? I know you mentioned 6 weeks, but is it a focus in the management meetings, and how is that discussion usually had, and what sort of volume are we sort of looking at?
In the meetings, I know when we have kind of at manager level meetings, it's not really discussed beyond workflow planning.
Okay.
As to what the exec talk about from that perspective, and if they pass on a directive to get leave down, I think beyond COVID there hasn't been much of a discussion around it. So I don't know whether they've got a particular number they look for. I know that lately, I know in my scope of the scope of my role at the moment, we've been talking about it. I've been asked to do reporting around leave, but more around how it affects the team's ability to make budget.
Okay.
So basically, in that, because the budgets were based on capacity predictions, I know that what I've looked at the moment is that there's a bunch of extra leave being taken than what I guess the normal budget for it would be. So, for example, if a team is 100 hours under capacity for the month because someone's taken leave, then that affects their potential or their ability to meet their budget, because the amount of work going out the door goes down.
Yeah. And are the partners or the individual business units penalised for carrying those excess leave balances, or leave, like anything that sort of results in that, apart from
not around the balances? Everything really around the business tends to revolve around meeting revenue target.
Yeah.
And so if they don't meet a target because somebody's taken the leave, kind of like you mentioned, is there does something happen?
Well, yeah. So it would affect ultimately if the team doesn't hit budget, that then hits other discussions around bonuses and like, for example, there's performance bonus and discretionary bonus. So if the firm as a whole, or if the team as a whole makes budget, then you've ticked the one box. So one is around team performance and one is around personal performance. So
if I'm a manager of a team and my team doesn't hit budget because someone's gone on leave, then I'm potentially not going to get the bonus that I thought I might get.
Well, the thing is, the budgets in theory take into account X amount of leave, a reasonable amount of leave and write-offs and all the rest of it. So the budgets are set taking into account all of that.
So it's not really an excuse. Is that what you're saying?
In a normal situation, no. We're anticipating, for example, this year to be an abnormal situation, and that's why I've been asked to do some extra reporting around how are we tracking versus what we would expect, and what is effectively the revised capacity number, so that we could say, well, yes, it was a factor and we'll take it into account, or no, it still should.
Yeah. So you mentioned, like, obviously, ideally, it should be factored in. Can you give some specific or some some different use cases as to what's the downstream, what's been the result of your findings, and why hasn't it gone to plan this year?
Well, I mean, the key thing is, I think from a budgeting perspective, people have just gone, these are the people I anticipate. I don't think anyone really took it into account.
Okay.
I don't think anyone said in July or in June, a bunch of, the world's reopened and a bunch of extra people are going to go on leave. And so I'm going to adjust my capacity that way.
Okay.
All they tended to do was say, I need this extra staff or that extra staff because these people have left. They took into account, and because the argument has always been that if a grad or if a senior accountant has a target of 1,350 billable hours a year, that's 48 weeks. That's assuming 48 weeks.
Yeah.
So that's assuming they're taking their leave entitlement. So that's always been the budget, and I don't think anyone ever just. And I think you will probably find at a team level that on average people are probably taking less than that anyway. But there have been a few blips that we can definitely see, where a bunch of people have gone to Europe and whatever else this year because they could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there was no way for anyone that was doing their planning for the next 12 months to forecast any of these blips you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, beyond as to whether there was no way they could have done it, I know they definitely didn't.
Okay.
We plan out the spreadsheets that we have for everyone's. Well, I think the typical leave that has been, the blips that have been taken into account typically by most people, when I look at what they did do versus what they could have done, is there's a monthly breakdown effectively, and you kind of fill it out. And if you assume nothing else, then it carries across. But we know, for example, that we had particular directors or managers or staff members that were due to go on maternity leave. So it was those big ones that really got kicked in. That was, this person is out of action for the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it was the effect of those ones beyond saying this person has booked a 2-month holiday. What has kind of tended to happen, and the funny thing about accounting and what a lot of, I think, accounting firms took advantage of when they did their 80% and this, that, and the other, was that by virtue of the fact that there are pretty hard set ATO deadlines, the work needs to get done, so the work will get done. So the point that I kind of made in the feedback was around your good staff getting the work done either way. You kind of find if someone takes a month off, you might lose net a couple of weeks productivity, but they tend to work harder on either side of the holiday to either get work done ahead of time or catch up what they missed out on, because the ATO deadlines are still there and the staff deadlines are still there and whatever else. I'm not saying that's a good thing. But the accounting industry, like the legal industry, has probably made a fortune off unpaid overtime, off exact issues like that.
Yeah. So that's actually, yeah, I noticed that particularly on your comments, which was fascinating. So you're saying the teams will actually cram hours in either side of holidays, or how does that usually look like? What do you mean by making up the hours?
Oh, not in terms of like you'll never see it on a timesheet necessarily. But you will know. I mean, it's the age-old thing of, you kind of laugh about, you know, if I'm going to take a week off, it's going to take me. I'll probably end up working extra to make sure that the work can continue or whatever can continue, and kind of, you know, because those deadlines tend to be there. You might say, well, I'm going to be away when that deadline hits, so I'll make sure I get the work done beforehand, or whatever happens, and so. And I said the accounting industry and legal industry is kind of famous for that kind of unpaid overtime. That just tends to happen, especially and the comment I made, especially around the higher performers, that's what they'll tend to do. And then some of the other kind of not as high performers probably end up doing it because they feel pressured anyway.
Yeah. Okay. And is unpaid overtime tracked at all in William Buck?
We're trying to.
Okay.
It's hard. I mean, there's some obvious ones. If people fill out at the moment, most of the tracking that we do, or all the tracking really that we do right now, is based around timesheet entries, right? Because professional services, you fill out timesheets, so you see people's timesheets. What kind of the undocumented behaviour in a lot of situations is, because professional services firms that obviously have that focus on WIP balances, right? And we tend to reward people that either specifically or just, you know, attitude-wise, reward people who don't go over budget and who manage to keep the WIP under control. Once people have hit their 7.5 hours, they tend to stop recording. especially where the budget's already set for the job, so it's not going to affect what you build, and it doesn't affect their remuneration because we don't pay overtime, right? And in that respect, so they go, well, they just put 7.5 hours in their timesheet, even if they might have been in the office. Like I always used to say this to people: is like I walk around the office at 7 o'clock and it's half full, but I check everyone's timesheets and they're only done 7.5 hours.
Mhm.
So either you're not efficient halfway through the day, or you're not putting down all your time. I'm pretty sure it's the latter.
And
Is it?
sorry, go, Jack. Go, mate.
Is that something that, I mean, I'm an accountant, I've been there, I know exactly what you're talking about. Is that something that the firm is wanting to do something about, or is it not something that yeah?
Is it something they want to do something about? I would say probably not explicitly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is probably an attitude in the industry as well of this is how you get ahead. And that's probably more of an old school mentality.
Mm-hmm.
My father-in-law is also a partner in another big name firm. And his big bugbear at the moment is that he's a partner and he's the last one out of the office. And, that's not how it was in his day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that you kind of, so the industry is known for it kind of thing. I think the attitude is changing. And I think people are worried about it insofar as it affects them being burnout. I think that there's probably a little bit of blindness around. I think that if they don't necessarily encourage it, they definitely recognize and reward it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you'll kind of talk up someone that stayed back and got it done and delivered the client result, but you won't necessarily go back and go, well, is that a resourcing problem?
Yeah.
And now, if you do see, we did have this one, that if you know that if your team is under-resourced and you're trying to get the point across that your team is under-resourced, and again, so it's insofar as it affects their objectives, being I need more people, right? That's when it becomes an issue again, because you say, my guys are working until whatever, I'm going to cop it because they're going to leave, right? Is kind of, and it usually happens when I ask them to get involved in transformation initiatives. They talk about how slammed all their guys are, and if I ask them to do anything else, they're going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of where it does tend to pop out. And I think that, I know in our firm, it was definitely a mentality that needed to change due to COVID. But it was definitely, we were very old school about that pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me personally, I've tended to be an early worker. I've tended to kind of be historically one of the guys that turns the lights on at 7 o'clock. But then when I had my first daughter, I would come in at 7 so I could leave at 5 to 5:30 to get home for dinner and bath time. And it was noted that other managers are in the office till 7, and it was noted that I was leaving early. Mm-hmm. Early, being 5:30. I also then had to make the point of, by the way, I'm turning the lights on at 7, and people won't see that because they don't get it until 9. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely an attitude that we had in the past that I think is changing.
And how's it shifted?
COVID has made working from home a lot more common, and so then at workplace hours, there's naturally been less of an emphasis on workplace hours, because half the time you're expecting people to not be in the office on a particular day unless you know exactly what their days are. And I think what it did was put an emphasis on, it made people realize that you could get work. I think it made people realize that different people have different working patterns. And we covered this during so we do a manager director conference every year, again, where we get everyone together and we do it all in person. And this was the first year post-COVID, obviously. But one of the things that we covered during that was different people's working patterns. And so getting them to recognize some people are early risers and early starters and more productive during the morning. Some people are more productive later on at night. And yes, you've got core hours that you need to be available to clients, but recognizing different people's work patterns and focusing on output and product versus time in the office was a really big thing.
So how did you shift that from productivity and output from hours in the office? Like you mentioned, if people only add 7.5 hours for timesheet, how did you measure that? How have you noticed it's changed?
it's been about changing director attitudes.
Okay.
And the thing is that when everyone is in the office every day, then it becomes about like presenteeism and like, I see that person in, I see that person out. Once you take people out of the office and you don't see them come in, you don't see them leave, what you're then measuring is what they're getting done, right? At which point it's less of, because that mindset has shifted, they're not focusing on, oh, that person came in at this time and left at that time, because half the time they're home, you don't know when they left off. But what you know is that you got the work that you needed on time. You got the work when you needed it.
Yeah.
So it's just by nature of not having people in front of you that you then start measuring it differently. And there's always exceptions to that on either side. I mean, when you've got people that might have a bit of a performance issue, you'll notice they don't log on till 9:30, or you notice that they're not responsive for long periods of the day, or you'll notice that behavior more, versus when they are performing, we don't really care because you're getting what you want when you want it.
So having said that, like you mentioned a non-performer, how would you validate that on their timesheet then?
A lot of the times, from a timesheet perspective, you'll see that their timesheets are fine, usually because they'll have the hours. Their productivity number might be low. So they might have more non-billable time versus billable time.
Mm-hmm.
But more often than not, for the kind of performer you're talking about, their write-offs are usually higher. So either the write-offs are higher, and the reason of that is they're spending longer on each job, usually because they're having to redo the work. And then you've got the intrinsic, or kind of the other side of it, which is direct feedback from the people you're working with. This person always has 3-4 reworks, this person doesn't.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. It sounds like it's shifted a lot for your firm specifically as well over
Yeah, that's
and it sounds like there's some like good movement in the way. Where do you see this heading though? You mentioned talent attraction being a problem.
Yeah.
Output over office hours, obviously, and a few other trends. How do you see William Buck moving with this trend in those areas in the future?
I think the key areas that we seem to be focusing on at the moment, I think we're kind of moving in the right direction is, I think there is a big opportunity still with things like learning and development, because it's improving the value proposition to the employee. And so we've always tried to focus on having a high performing culture. And so equipping the staff with as much training and resources as they need personally to make them as good as we can at their job, not just to achieve our outcomes, but to achieve theirs. And we'll focus on a lot of things around, we do a lot of training around things like soft skills, or what will be seen as soft skills, because it's about developing the individual rather than the technical, get the work done stuff. So I think that's a big one. That's definitely a big one for us. We are looking at from a technical or kind of an IT transformation type perspective, we are looking at better ways to track the things that we can't track right now. So things about, talking about unpaid overtime and how do we track that? There's different tools and solutions that we've been looking at that do things like capture activity. So you say, I don't care, I don't want to know necessarily, although we can get access to it, who people are emailing, right? What I am interested in is, or what documents they're looking at. What I am interested in is when they're looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's a tool that we've been looking at recently that we're not going to go ahead with that particular one because it's too restrictive on what it works with, but the concept is right. And that was a really good view that stuck in my mind is, if I bring up a particular person, I could see, I don't care about when they receive emails because that's not under their control, but I can see when they send emails, right? And the example that we got given in the demo was, the CFO, the COO, or whoever it was, CTO, showed us his graph, and it showed a lot of emails being sent at 7 a.m. and a lot of emails, and then it was kind of steady, and then a lot of stuff sent at 10 o'clock at night. And he goes, now, if that was one of my employees, I'd be really worried. I'd be focused. That person's a key candidate for burnout because their workday effectively starts at 7 and ends at close to midnight. Now it's me, it's management. I know that that's part of the job, but if it's one of my junior guys and they're doing a high level of correspondence throughout the day and then it spikes at night as well, so they're doing a lot of work, then that's a person I need to look out for.
Yeah.
Right. And the same thing with then seeing what they work on. Not to care about, oh, you're this client versus that client or whatever, but what are their active hours, right? And so what are the logs saying that when are they checking documents in and out? When are they looking at particular applications? You know, and that was a really cool one because it would, from an employee perspective, it allowed them to preload data for their timesheet. So it was about time capture, right? And saying, well, the system is helping you by showing you what emails you sent and what you worked on and letting you put time codes against it. But what, from the business side, from the management side, what we could do is say, this person is working on, you know, did 10 hours of work, but only captured 7 on their timesheets because it would then compare the activity, right? So we logged 10 hours of active time and 7.5 went to the timesheet.
Yeah. And
So
what do you think, what's going to be the impact of that when you actually have that measurable, like overtime, like we talked about? What do you think? How do you think the organisation will shift to accommodate that?
I think it will open up some very real discussions around how much you actually need to resource a team. And I think that that's the key one. I think like any business, you probably try to figure out what's the minimum footprint you need to get a job done. But I think that the retention issue, especially, has what it hides at the moment is not just how long it takes to get someone in, but how long it takes to get them operation.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think people are starting to realize that. You kind of say, well, if adding another junior, it means that my manager is less, or my seniors are less stressed and burnt out. Because if I lose a manager, you know, if I lose anyone, but let's say I lose a good senior accountant, it's going to take me 3 months to find them and get them in. It's probably going to take them at least a month to get up and running and useful, and probably 3 months till they're really humming and they know their client base, and we're really seeing that efficiency. So that effect on your real capacity and usable capacity is real, right? And so it might be worth spending a bit extra and getting another resource in to protect the really good resources.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. That's all I had, Jack. That's been really interesting. There is correlations there between sort of some of the stuff we've talked about, Jack, but that was it's interesting. It's awesome to hear it from like a around the points you mentioned around like the optimization and reducing burnout through like improving operational strategy. That was really cool.
Our big thing, and operational efficiency has been our big one lately. So we're looking at as well, from a general efficiency perspective, what are the tasks that people are doing that are just burning time and adding zero value?
Yeah.
Would those tasks necessarily contribute to burnout? So in the context of this discussion, maybe not. But it is about improving the general proposition for employees and saying, you know, we won't have you doing garbage work because we've put this other stuff in place so you don't have to. So we'll keep you engaged and working on interesting work and working on interesting clients. And our big thing has been culture. And sometimes we copped a little bit of flack for wanting people in the office as much as we do. But we're also a big believer in the value of the water cooler discussions and of the discussions of what are you working on? That sounds interesting, you know. And so we try and emphasize, we're trying to give people reasons to be in the office. So whether it's focus group meetings and catered lunches and all that kind of stuff, whatever we can do to make the in-office experience more relevant rather than just saying be in the office. We want to get those benefits of people being in the office and talking and having that interaction.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. It's really interesting, John. Thanks for that.
Really appreciate it, John. And we've actually spoken to a few other people who are in, you know, like Stacey, who are in relatively big firms. And I think the challenge that most larger firms face around capacity planning, resourcing, budgeting, encouraging the right behaviors, managing burnout, retaining staff, attracting staff, that group of conversations is something that everyone speaks about. And I think what Brett and Kushal are working on is an aspect of that, which I think to some firms is a bigger pain point. And maybe on your side, that aspect of this conversation isn't a huge pain point from what I'm sensing, at least that leave management piece. It's a little bit like, yeah, someone might take a lot of leave one year and over the course of our team, it'll average out and we'll just kind of balance it and it just works. Whereas you kind of get the sense from talking to other people that it's something they really want to get under control. So it's quite interesting to hear the different perspectives.
I feel like it's definitely a smaller firm problem because the directors are closer to the cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
I think the larger the business gets, the more of an abstract it becomes.
Yeah.
Versus like, I think when you're in a smaller firm, you're a lot closer to, I'm carrying this money. Like, you try to keep your cash balances at a reasonable number and how much cash you need to tie up. And that's directly relating to, money that they can then pull out for themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the way we approach our process of presenting the startup and then seeing who kind of says they're interested is often how I get that initial validation of who is the target audience for this. So we did have a bit of a mix though. So we got some conversations coming up with some smaller firms, but look, really appreciate your time, John. Thanks again. I know that, basically it was just an hour of us asking and learning as much as we could from you and didn't get a lot back, but it was very insightful, really good feedback, and thank you again for your time.
I'm glad to help.
Easy.
Thanks, John.
Thanks,
Appreciate
mate.
it.
Appreciate it.
Cheers, guys.
Okay, see you.